I'm pleased to welcome back our second return guest to the CCMA Leadership Podcast, Friar John. And Friar John, it is so good to see you and hear your voice. How are you, and how has life been for you?
Doing well, doing wonderful. Trying to be a fisher of men and following out that call to encourage vocations, both in the Franciscan life and diocesan life and single life, married life. And so it's a beautiful place to be in ministry.
Awesome. Well, you bring so much energy to the work you do, and you can definitely tell it is more than a job for you. Your face just radiates enthusiasm, and I'm sure that that's really encouraging. And today our central topic is joy. And it's interesting. We're recording this podcast in late December 2017. And my wife and I were talking this morning, and she said, I'm so stressed. We have 4 kids and the presents, and I hope everything's just right, and the food, and who's coming over, and traveling to grandma's house in Pennsylvania. And it can be easy to lose sight of the real kernel of the season, and really that invitation to joy. So I know you have some thoughts on joy from a Franciscan perspective and just as a Catholic, and love to hear more about that.
It's funny you bring that up at Christmas, because I think of Scott Hahn had put out a book called Joy to the World, and it's one of the most popular books in bookstands, especially at Christmas. It's big red, and he says he wrote it because he was forgetting the reasons for joy, and he was turning into a neurotic, and he had to write down the reasons to be joyful in the everyday, and he didn't know it was going to be a Christmas classic and a huge bestseller at this time. And I think you see it in a lot of bookstores. And maybe if there's a recipe for joy, I think he kind of focused on, breaking down that word J-O-Y, J for Jesus, O for others, Y for yourself. And that can be a really good recipe for, what does Jesus say about joyfulness, and what do others say, and what do I learn in my own journey myself. And that can be just a nice little kernel nutshell of how to direct our energies for joy in the everyday.
Mm-hmm. So does Francis have a particular theology of joy, or some unique perspectives or stories from his own life from the 13th century related to joy?
Yeah, they used to nickname him Posa, which is an Italian word for kind of a crazy man. And if we were to interpret that as being a fool for Christ, I think we've got it right there with St. Francis, because he had that contagious joy that really caught the enthusiasm of others with a net of joy. I mean, he would just bring them right in. One of my favorite images is St. Francis playing a violin in the woods with 2 sticks. And he's dancing, and he has this wonderful movement in his arms, and you can just, it just sort of gets contagious, the idea of just this fool for Christ, not worrying about what anyone else thinks, and he's just sharing his joyfulness with the birds and the animals. And I love that about St. Francis. And probably one of his famous stories was about him and Leo trying to find perfect joy. And he said to his brother Leo, write this down. What is perfect joy? And he says, okay, I'm writing, Francis. And he says, well, if we go and recruit for vocations at the University of Paris and receive the smartest, most intelligent candidates coming into the Franciscan order, this is not perfect joy. And he says to Leo, and if we have the prelates, the cardinals, the highest ranking officials of the church all coming to the Franciscan order, this too is not perfect joy. And if we have kings and queens and royalty and all those royal families joining our ranks, that isn't perfect joy either. And if the followers of Francis go out and perform miracles and sway the hardest of atheists to turn to Christ, that also is not perfect joy. And now Leo's frustrated, because he's like, well, then what is perfect joy? And Francis says, well, on a long journey, you're traveling in the middle of winter, and it's snowing out, and the snow is hitting your habit, and it's collecting moisture all the way down on the bottom hem of your habit, and it's creating icicles on the hem of your habit because it's so cold out. And as you walk, your legs are swinging like a pendulum into those icicles, and they're becoming bloody and scabbed. This is someone who's traveled a whole lot. And he says, and you arrive to the door of your own Franciscan house. Then you knock on the door and say, it's Brother Francis looking for lodging. And the door gets slammed in your face by your fellow brother that says, we don't have room in the house. Wham, slams the door. Francis knocks on the door and says, no, this is Brother Francis. I've come to stay with you. And he says, there's plenty of simple and stupid people just like you. We don't need you. Slam. The third time, Francis pleading with his brother on the other side of the door, saying, for the love of God, man, take me in. It's cold. It's wet. I'm hungry. I need a place to stay. And his brother says, go down to the Croziers. You find plenty of people just like you down there. Francis turns to Leo and says, if you have not lost your composure, you've maintained your virtue, and you haven't become angry, you have found perfect joy.
Wow. So there's a connection there between suffering and rejection and joy.
Exactly. And so he's kind of reminding us that, it's not all, a dance through the daisies and a beautiful chorus of song and hallelujahs as we do our Christian walk, that it does come with suffering and difficulty. And if we can maintain our composure and maintain our real call as loved by God, and people loved by God, that we can find that joy. We kind of have a crazy sense of humor with the friars, that when you're traveling and all your logistics fall through, there's no one there to pick you up at the airport, your luggage gets lost on the way, and you finally get to your place and they don't have any beds for you, that your brother will be there to whisper in your ear to say, perfect joy, brother. Joy.
So, Friar John, what's your counsel for campus ministers? I mean, many times campus ministers are serving and they're very aware of their limits. I have limits in terms of budget, limits in terms of staffing, limits sometimes in terms of space, sometimes limits in terms of vision and what God could do on campus. But I think what I hear you saying and St. Francis through you is sometimes limits are a portal to a bigger understanding or appreciation of joy.
Absolutely. And I think it comes down to the simplicity of one person at a time. I think about, Mother Teresa, Saint Mother Teresa, who said, be somebody's somebody. And it's just one person at a time, reaching out in joy. And maybe it's that oddball who you can't get to leave the campus ministry offices. And that's the one person you're going to reach out on that day. And it starts small, but that kindness to those fringe people around you is going to attract others to say, oh my gosh, look how kind they are to people that are kind of out there close to the crazies of St. Francis, the losers, the fools for Christ. That
Sure.
There's something that I think it can be really simple and straightforward, and that KISS philosophy, keep it simple, silly, just that one person at a time.
Right. So are there in this kind of busy season of, 1 year is closing, another year is beginning, I think many times people are aware of outside pressures to be a certain way or do a certain thing or get a certain number of gifts or begin resolutions or whatever. And to me, it seems like the invitation is more an interior invitation to find joy. What are some practical ways that people with busy schedules can find joy as 1 year is closing and another one's beginning?
Yeah, I think, I think that joyfulness is sort of like an interior composure that can be grateful even in the most difficult of times. I think sometimes you might go to a party and you always see the party smile. The host or hostess is there and say, oh, it's so good that you're here. It kind of reminds me of going to a restaurant and you have the host or hostess there at the door and they're like your best friend and they don't even know you. And then you sit at a table and there's this beautiful, person who's going to wait on you and bring you food. And then they go to the back kitchen and they turn into a holy terror, because I can't believe these difficult people. And they come out, how was your food? Did you enjoy your food? And this plastic happiness that is not anything when I'm talking about. I mean, I think joyfulness runs in deeper waters and can have that composure that can get through some really difficult times that come along the way. And some of it, we put on ourselves, and we have great expectations on ourselves to properly prepare for the way of the Lord and take on extra devotions for Advent, and we're doing extra giving and Christmas card lists and cleaning and decorating and presents right away. I mean, it can be really overwhelming. And just to simplify it to, who needs a smile today? I want to be that deliverer of a little bit of joy. I think just the other day I was at my favorite coffee establishment inside a grocery store, and somehow when I was texting a friend with my phone and I had a napkin and a little Scooby snack there, and they handed me my coffee and I fumbled it. Complete disaster. It went over the counter, it went on the floor, it went on my wallet, everything is completely wet. It went on me. And this woman behind me, the long, long line of people, she says, "Oh, not having a good day today, Butterfingers." And she's got this sarcasm and this wit that's just delightful. And so she's pointing me as to where the napkins are and how I need to clean it up. And she's like directing the whole scene. And I can't find the garbage can because I'm caffeine deprived and I'm having a rotten day and it's getting worse as it goes. And she goes, "Well, what are you going to do about your coffee now? You just spilled it all over the floor." And I'm like, "I don't know. My day's a wreck." And so the barista says, "Oh, don't worry. No, we'll get your drink for you. We'll give you another drink." And this woman behind me says, "You got to be kidding me. I am not okay with this." And she takes her keys and she throws them on the ground. Wow. And she says, "You dropped your coffee and you get a new cup of coffee. I throw my keys on the ground. I want a new car." And it lit up the whole supermarket. People howling, laughing. And I literally had nothing to do with it except fumbling this coffee and to run with it. And maybe it's part of the season, people are more approachable in the season of Christmas, but it was one of the most joyful moments. And all I had to do is just go along with God crashing in my life, because that's what it felt like. I mean,
Butterfingers.
Dented pride and all.
I think it was Teresa of Avila who said, a lot of the spiritual life is not about adding things, but subtracting things. And I'm curious as to your perspective as a vocation director and as a Franciscan. What would you love to see people perhaps consider doing less of in 2018?
What could people do less of? Well, I think that message of simplicity is just a real important one with St. Francis, to keep it simple so that we can pile on the expectations for ourselves and pile on the expectation on others if we're in a family, and putting that on other cousins or nieces or nephews or our own children, that we can really loosen up to say, let's do something little, but do it well, better than anyone else, so that when we do the examination of conscience at night before we go to bed, we're going to do that together as a family, and we're going to do this really well, this one thing. And maybe we'll get to the other stuff, but this one thing, that's what we're going to prioritize. Mm-hmm. And I think that just helps keep it simple. St. Teresa of Avila cracks me up because she was such a comedian. She was on a donkey once, right? A great Carmelite sister. And she's on a donkey traveling, and she's crossing this huge mud puddle, and the donkey bucks her at just the wrong time. She was flying in the air, plop right in the middle of the mud puddle. And she says out loud, "Lord God, what are you thinking? This couldn't have happened at a worse time. Why did you allow this to happen to me?" And in her mind, in her heart, she heard the Lord say, "Well, this is how I treat my friends. And she says, no wonder you have so few of them. And I just love that. You know, Teresa of Avila, just that willingness to be sarcastic and maybe a little bit acerbic with a cutting comment in her relationship with God. That's really being honest. That's not being, plastic or putting on a happy smile in difficult circumstances. She's like giving it to the Lord, and the Lord's giving it right back.
I want to talk before we wrap up shop today about evangelization and joy. And, there's this phrase I love, if you're happy and you know it, inform your face. And and you're inviting young men to consider religious life. And so they're looking at you and they're seeing the joy that comes through the way you live and how you speak and your manner of invitation. And I wonder, Friar John, about what role does joy have in terms of evangelization on campus? The Holy Father talks about we can't be sourpusses. We have to exude a sense of deep joy. And what are your thoughts in terms of, how evangelization benefits or includes or maybe is even inseparable from joy?
Yeah, we can't be baptized in lemon juice and be all sour on everyone around us. Yeah, I think that joy is like a net and just pulls people towards you when you have that authentic joy. And I think that's probably one of the most powerful evangelistic tools. I listen to Catholic Answers a lot, and Patrick Madrid talks about, meeting the person where they're at in charity and joy and not worrying about winning the argument. Because if we don't meet them with joy and charity, we've already lost the argument. Right. And I love that because, we Catholics have an answer for everything. And sometimes it's just better to be quiet and listen and look for that connection of joy to break that tension. And that can be a wonderful unifier. I think about just with the Franciscans, I've been kind of overwhelmed with joy and what the friars have taught me. We were at one gathering at the chapter of Mats in Cincinnati, 400 friars gathered all over the United States. And I was seeing them come in the chapel, and every friar that came through the door, I'm like, oh, he taught me how to pray the breviary. I'm so grateful, Oh, he taught me how to celebrate Mass for my first time, and I was so nervous. And he taught me how to sit with coffee early in the morning. And he wasn't even a coffee drinker, and he was sitting with me in charity because he knew I was having a rough time in formation. I'm like, what a wonderful loving. Another friar, teaching me how to help a brother save face and not embarrassing them in front of the whole group, but pulling them to the side and say, hey, what you said there really hurt me. And I need to talk that out with you. I mean, what a wonderful thing that I was just so grateful. And from that came a wonderful sense of joy, just what I've learned from all these brothers. And it just gets, I think, and the other side of it is a good vocation always has that joy. You know it when you see it. Yeah. You definitely recognize it. And there's some that are miserable in their vocation. And we know what that looks like too. Yeah. Yeah. And you want to say, oh, please move, change your vocation. Why are you staying here? You're just a real bummer. A killjoy in my life. Please do something else.
A wet blanket. I was giving a talk recently to a parish group of parishioners, and a couple came up to my wife and I afterwards, and they said, oh, we've been married 30 years, and boy, you could just still see that spark, that joy, that love, and just best friends living out their vocation and community. It was really very moving, so, and that inspired us as well. So I think sometimes, like you're saying, it's not what it's how much you care. And when you do it in a joyful and ultimately happy way, it really is contagious for a lot of folks. Friar John, it's been such a treat having you on the podcast today. And again, for the second year in a row, which is a treat for us. How can folks find out more about you and the work that you're doing with the Franciscans?
Well, on the website, it's www.franciscansplural.org. And I'm working on a new blog. It's still a work in progress, and I'm looking for some good techno help out there with college students, but it's called a Why Not Friar, a YKNOT friar.org, and just kind of taking a lot of contribution from other writers and other friars to help unpack the vocation to religious life. And then I have email at franvoke@aol.com. There are people still using AOL.com. And yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you more.
Great. Thank you very much for being our guest today.
Peace and all good things.